Welcome to SEC Football Live here from Full 40 Sports. That's Stephen Godfrey. I am Braden Gall. Good Wednesday afternoon. How is everybody doing? How are you doing, Stephen?
I'm great. Fantastic.
Oh, that's it.
Nothing witty to add.
That's the only reason. That's what you get paid to do, is to be witty, Stephen. So if
Just
you're
to
not
add
going to do
witty?
that, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? No,
I'm just doing fine. I'm just, you know what? Fine.
We have a playoff game in College Station this weekend. I feel comfortable saying that about Missouri. And Texas A&M.
Okay, sure. Yeah. A playoff would imply that both teams have a shot, but okay.
In theory, both are still alive. We'll get to that. We'll get to that game coming up. What are we going to learn from those two, which I find utterly fascinating? Chaos at Auburn. The Vols, of course, coming off a bye week, are going to go to Arkansas. Can they avoid a letdown there? Florida still not acting like they should be acting. At least the coaching staff is not. And Oklahoma may have found a quarterback, so we'll get into that. A lot of stuff to do. Obviously, Georgia and Bama is going to take up a few minutes here. My question for you, Stephen, I'm going to ask you this in just a second, which is my question for you is going to be sort of who else in the SEC outside of Texas or even the rest of college football could sort of function inside that game flow on Saturday night the way Alabama and Georgia did it. And I'm not saying there weren't problems or questions or concerns for both teams or momentary lapses of execution, but just I'm not saying they were perfect, but it was a great football game, and I'm not sure how many teams could do what either of those two teams did in both the first and the second half. So we'll get to that in just a second. However, I want to shout out to our great friends, ML Rose, of course, 6 great locations around the Middle Tennessee area, proud sponsor of the show. Great place to grab burgers. They've got an SEC breakfast sandwich on Saturdays from 10 until 2 with drink specials. So you can get an SEC sandwich while watching SEC football and drinking beer and champagne and Bloody Marys 2-for-1s on Saturdays and Sundays. So if you're watching football, you're in the Nashville area, or if you're visiting, and we know a lot of you are watching from around the SEC, and if you are visiting and you want to hang out at a really great craft beer and burger joint in Nashville, Tennessee, try one of 6 great locations, ML Rose, all over Middle Tennessee. There you go, ML Rose.
If you're here to beat Vanderbilt,
perhaps
enjoy a beverage and a meal.
Either after the game, maybe Friday night. Great place to watch what has been great Friday night action. You think we're ever going to get an SEC game on a Friday night, Steve?
Oh God, I hope not. No, it's been obviously has not been discussed on this show because of the subject matter of this program, but I have on several other programs, including my own, talked about how I just think the Big Ten is wasting valuable inventory on Friday night, and also there's a pretty easy way to counter program the NFL on Thursdays too because it's on Prime, and the state of college football scheduling is as bad and I think ill-advised as some of the state of college football conference alignment or anything else. So these games on Friday nights, man, I don't get it.
But here's the thing. Here's the weird thing that happens. It's happened to me the last few weeks, and it's part of this is our life place, right? I'm a middle-aged, early 40s father.
You're not in the bars at 2 a.m.
No, but I got sports ball with the kids all day Saturdays and Sundays. Like I've got to find college football takes a backseat to my daughter's select soccer league. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so what's happened is I have no competing interests on Friday nights. And so if they're going to give me a really good ACC game or a really good Big Ten game between ranked opponents, a really good, Oregon team or whatever, like, I don't care. What I watched Ole Miss Kentucky game, it'll never happen at Vaught Hemingway on a Friday night. But I'm just saying, like, I am now more interested in Friday night games because I know that the kids have to be in bed, which means I have to be here. And I'm going to sit down and watch most of what happens on Friday nights. So there you go.
I get that and I appreciate it, but we are a small sample size of what is otherwise a considerably smaller overall television audience on Friday nights. It's been like that since television became ubiquitous. Look, the Big Ten made a huge move in anchoring their investment in college football in that 11 a.m. Central slot, and it's really worked out really well for them. They took like the ideology, the ethos of, Ohio State, Michigan's always at noon Eastern. So we're going to start pulling games earlier. They also did it, by the way, little behind the curtain. They did it to bridge their pregame show that goes up against ESPN and have that that connectivity basically help boost the ratings for the tune-in crowd. That's why that show bleeds over like into like 11:05 or 11:06 a.m. or whatever for ratings purposes. But it worked. We've had a lot of big games. Big Noon Saturday is now a thing. It's not mocked anymore. Like, Friday night, I don't get. I think they got a long way to go.
Okay, fair enough. I just, selfishly, it's about me, Steven,
Yeah,
and I'd like to see.
Convenient for us, but
Yeah.
I was frustrated last week because it was actually the opposite thing. Where it's like I went to the movies with my kids and I walked out and I was like, I also absolutely expected Miami, Virginia Tech to be
Stupid.
not a blowout, but certainly not the game
Oh.
that it was. And so I walked out. I walked out of the movie at like the third quarter with my kids, and I was like, oh, I actually have to invest time in this.
It was fun. It was great. And then
game.
I got to flip over and watch the end of the Washington Rutgers game.
Yeah, did
okay.
you see Mike Pereira lose it about the officiate? What a weird night. Yeah, that was a weird setup.
All right. So SEC stuff, just as weird as Auburn or Ole Miss or South Carolina or anything else that happens in the SEC these days. So let's start with Bama and Georgia. And ultimately, my question is, how many teams? I think Texas could do it. I think we can start there and kind of eliminate them from the equation. But while you can look, and I am curious to see what you say to this. What are the things? We got a lot of hell online. We had some fun with Georgia fans telling us that we've clearly not watched the game, despite the fact that the Georgia Bulldogs team, despite the fact that we 100% nailed exactly how the game was going to play out. Alabama very good first half, Georgia very good second half. Now they were both caricatures of that prediction in how it unfolded and how good Alabama was in the first half and how good Georgia was in the second half. But it played out exactly as we predicted in theory. And I'm curious. Number one is, what were the mistakes that led to those two halves, and are they fixable or are they concerns? And then the follow-up to me is, how many teams could respond the way Georgia did? How many teams could just slice up Georgia the way Alabama did? And I left that game thinking, all right, that was great, that was crazy, that was wild, unprecedented, et cetera, et cetera. But that I don't know how many teams could do what both of those two teams did on separate halves of the game. And I'm curious what you have to say.
I think you could probably find 5 or 6 programs in different permutations that could give you a similar result. I think a lot of what happened on last weekend was because it's October now, but it was September. The entirety of the first half was about what Georgia had not seen on the field from Alabama to that point in the season. They were not prepared. They were not prepared when it came to the perimeter rush. They were not prepared when it came to the defensive looks that they were providing Carson Beck. It was just simple. The adjustments were made in the second half. Give Georgia a lot of credit. My colleague at SED, Richard Johnson, actually wrote something for CBS where he kind of broke down the specific schematic look in cover zero that was bothering Beck, and then how they adjusted to it in the second half. If I had to recreate this, I think that's what you're asking. I think I could do this with Ohio State and Tennessee. I think I could do it with Ohio State and Tennessee.
I think those are two. I think Ohio State's on the list. I think Tennessee. Yeah. I think Tennessee could do it. I think they have the right pieces.
You would actually have Tennessee in the Alabama role. And I think that you would have Ohio State in the Georgia role. These are not one-to-one analogs for offensive or defensive style or something like that, but you can't do that. You can only get so close. There's a handful of other programs that you could do this and create that kind of game. But my point is this: it's more about what was not shown to that point. And it was a game that was very much of its time on the schedule. It will not look like that if these two teams see each other again.
No.
And not only will it not look like that, these teams won't look like that. I don't think Alabama will be that effective rushing to the perimeter. I don't think Georgia will stumble that much against a cover zero look or just particular kinds of pressures that were bothering Beck. This is the whole thing, guys. This is why we're doing this in the 12-team era. I was touting on previous shows why, hey, it's good Michigan and USC are playing in that new combination of the Big Ten. The SEC hasn't really had that moment yet because like Texas and Georgia is yet to come of the new additions. It's nice. Oklahoma could, I think, slow down the Vols. Actually, that's a decent comp. We want these games earlier without the consequence of fatally knocking out someone's season with a loss, because neither team exited this game Alabama's in the driver's seat and they're the number one team in the country, but Georgia did not exit this game as really worse for the wear. Actually, Braden, I've never seen a game, top 5, top 10, whatever you want to call it, at this point in the season where I was more convinced the loser was in a better place.
All right, so okay, let's explore that a little bit, because some of the question I'm asking is, a lot of this is games momentum happens, things happen. You give up a touchdown, you go 3 and out, you give up a touchdown. That can happen to anybody, and then it's very hard to stop that, change it, and then come back from that. Georgia did manage to do that, but how many teams can do that to Georgia in the first place? And then how many teams are capable of stopping that momentum, making the necessary adjustments, and then just on the road against a very good Alabama defense, granted inexperienced at cornerback, for example, and attack them and do what Carson Beck did in the second half. I think there are 3, maybe 4, maybe 5 teams that can do that. It doesn't mean that doesn't also create weaknesses for Alabama. Kirby said it at halftime. He's like, man, we didn't expect to see this, and this. We also said that last week on the show. We said this is going to be a first half where we see more from Georgia and Alabama than we've ever seen before. This season, I mean. We hadn't seen anything from them, and we saw a bunch of new stuff from Bama's offense. And then Georgia did a bunch of fun stuff on defense in the second half and turned out same on offense. I guess I don't think – so you're saying – let me make sure I get this correct. You're not saying you think Georgia is better than Alabama.
I'm saying Georgia is better for having gone through this. I think Georgia is in a better place.
Yeah.
And I think Georgia may end up being better for it than Alabama, because if you look at the data they provided, either half by half or quarter to quarter, I was really impressed with Kirby's resolve. They were getting their statistical asses kicked. Okay. And
there's nobody that can do that can do what they did in the second half. I don't think there's anybody that can do that.
Maybe there's a handful, or I think Texas might be capable. I mean, I think I think Ohio State is capable. I think in a very different way, Michigan might be capable. They're just so reductive on offense. It's hard to add them to the idea of like, I don't think the thing is, I don't think Michigan's defense is structured in a way that honestly, they probably would have been in the outside faster and more effective than Georgia was just so blindsided. Now that might be a cause for concern. They went in.
Right, exactly.
Look, you give DeBoer credit. He definitely knew what they weren't expecting, but Georgia, displayed a level of resiliency that was fairly amazing. And so exiting it, I think Georgia's better for it. There's no real concept. Look, they can still make the SEC championship provided a handful of things happen. The only thing they lost was room for more error. If you're Georgia, you have to go and now come close to running that table. That's the biggest thing.
I don't disagree with anything you just said about Georgia. I think you have to also add it to Bama for a few contextual reasons. Number one is that they had not been in this situation with the current power structure. That Kalen DeBoer had not been in this situation at Alabama with this team. And so there was an element of proof of concept to some degree for them to believe that they belong. I'm not saying the players, but certainly some of the young players that made huge plays, freshman DBs, freshman receivers for Alabama. But the other thing is had Georgia not made the full comeback and put Alabama down, where you look around, and this is my favorite part. This is one of my new favorite things with college football, which is my 7-year-old seeing the faces in the crowd of devastation. She gets such a huge kick out of it. And it's not because like we're fans of any one team or whatever. She's like, Dad, look at their faces. Look at that stuff. And she just enjoys like the surrender cobra of it all when it's happening. And so what I think we all have been in places as fans of teams. You, unfortunately, in the Super Bowl, me every year as a Mets fan, minus Francisco Lindor's home run over your Braves on Monday. We have all been in those like moments where the pit of our stomach is like tightening into a knot, and that we know what's coming and we don't think we can accomplish what we need to do in that moment, right? Like it's painful. It's utterly like Packers giving up on onside kick to Seattle. You know what I mean? Like in the NFC Championship game.
Okay.
Like those things happen. And Bama was in that moment where I don't think anybody in that stadium maybe expected them to win that game at that point. But the players giving it all up and then falling behind and then to come back and counterpunch the way they did. I think you learned as much I think Bama is benefiting from that as much as Georgia is. I think they both equally benefit from that. There's no
way to measure it. We're talking about something that's entirely subjective and it's ephemera. Sure. But I really like where Georgia's at for a couple reasons. One, the defense was as effective as the offense in sort of react and respond. And then, the headline here is that I really did like Georgia's offense for once. I really did like the fact that all of a sudden I'd have to dig up my notes from, we did a show on Sunday about this, but like all of a sudden it's chunk, deep play. Like the passing game was effective and quick and efficient in the 2 scoring drives that brought it to, I was like a 1-point Bama lead before the quick lead change, and then the inevitable viral moment trick play. And this game had it all in a lot of ways.
No, it did.
So
anyway, I just
and the other thing is this: it's still a quarterback sport, and the evolution at quarterback, taking nothing away from Milroe, was that I saw a better game from Beck coming out of a horrific first half. Like, can you name a time in which he's had to respond to that kind of challenge and done so admirably, so effectively? You didn't get to the end of that game thinking he's not capable of bringing us back. And that's something you earn.
I would say Auburn last year's where I saw it for the first time when they were down, and he completed a bunch of two. Just
they weren't down like that against Auburn.
No, of course not. But they were down about the same amount in the fourth quarter, and he just torched them right down the field. And he did it a couple of times later on in the season as well. I think he's done better in the fourth quarter than maybe you're giving him credit for. But I agree with your point. I think your point is valid. David says, "How often do you go 5 for 5 on fourth down?" Also, valid point. Look, football's a funny game. It's a funny, strange sport. And ultimately, I came away from that game enjoyment and entertained, but I also came away with it thinking, I just don't know how many teams could have played that game. And I think ultimately it's Texas, it's Ohio State, I think maybe it's Tennessee, and that might be it. I don't think Ole Miss can do it, clearly. We're going to talk about that. I don't think Mizzou can do it until proven otherwise. I think that's pretty clear. I certainly don't think I don't think Oregon could do it, maybe. Miami.
I don't think we know yet on Oregon.
I don't think I can say that about Miami. Penn State has no ability.
I think you could do it. Wait, which part about Miami are you doubting?
I don't think they have the. I think it takes. Both teams had extraordinary schematic moments where Kalen DeBoer came out in the first half with this this perfect game plan and then executed. So it's scheme meets talent meets execution, and they did it against. The best, most talented defensive coach and staff and players, maybe in the game, maybe, and then I think Kirby made elite adjustments to stop Milroe in the second half, and then the offense made elite adjustments in the second half.
To say it's not possible by anyone but the SEC or Ohio State, I think is reductive. I think there are places like Oregon.
I don't mean it about the SEC though. I don't mean it about the SEC. I'm just saying.
But that's the list. Like Oregon, we don't know yet. We don't know yet on Oregon. We don't. I mean, Miami had their worst game and still won because of an officiating blunder.
I don't trust Mario Cristobal to do that. That's what I'm saying. That's all.
I don't trust Mario Cristobal, but I do think Shannon Dawson has. And I think the combination that they have found something where, for the first time since I can remember, Miami has unlocked more talent out of a talented quarterback with their place, like with the actual play calling.
Agree.
So it's less. Mario's at his best when he's delegating.
Recruiting. We all agree with that. I'm just saying, talent, coaching, execution, put it all together. How many could do that? It's honestly, it's not even SEC or Miami. It's like Ohio State and Texas. That might be it. I'm not even sure Tennessee could play that game. I think they have the talent in the right places: defensive line, quarterback, offensive line. They're also Tennessee. I think this is going to get more and more coverage, as we talked about the defense before it got popular. Mm-hmm. This is going to get more and more coverage. I'm calling my shot on this one too. The fact that Tennessee is filled with 23-year-old fathers and married people. Tennessee is extremely old, and I think that is a rare thing in the sport. And that's going to get a lot more coverage, I think, as the season goes along. Maybe that's why. Oregon. I think Oregon's possible. I think Miami is possible. I don't think Penn State could put together either of those two halves of football. I don't think they could do it. Great defensive line, great offensive line, good running game. I don't think the passing game is there. And I like the coordinator, Colton Ecke. I think he's a solid hire.
Penn State's so weird, man, because like when the advanced analytics came back in, like the reason I haven't brought them up yet was I suffered through on a second screen that Illinois game. And it looks terrible, and then you get the advanced analytics back, and they blow them out in EPA. And so what that tells you is basically like, well, one, Illinois basically scored one time on a scripted drive to open the game. But like Penn State is still, they're really good and they're improved. And I think they could challenge one of the teams we're talking about in that like 8-9 game in a 12-team bracket. But God, did they self-sabotage?
Yeah.
There's no other explanation to be at home against an inferior team not score more.
Not to go on a Big Ten aside here, but I do think that what Penn State did in that game was very similar to what Josh Heupel and Tennessee did in the Oklahoma game, which is we know we can win it this way, so we're just going to do that because it's easier.
Now I'm defending the SEC in which that Illinois is not as good as Oklahoma, nor was that game on the road. I think Heupel, he didn't take flack for that comment, but I think a lot of people noticed it. You're on the road. You're in Norman. We talked about it after it happened. It's like, well, I don't need an ace to win this. I could just play a 9. So that's what I'm going to do. And also, hey, America might not know it, but I have a good defense. So I don't know if that comps to what happened with Penn State. I think Penn State is a suspicious top team, the way we might talk about Missouri or Ole Miss.
And that's my point. Is I'm not saying this is SEC versus everybody else. I don't think Ole Miss could play that game. I don't think Missouri could play that game. I don't think anybody else in the SEC could play that game other than Texas and maybe Tennessee. I don't think Penn State or Notre Dame can play that game. The point is, I came away from that going, these are two of the best teams in college football. It's not rocket science here. 2 great coaches, 2 great quarterbacks, 2 great rosters. This is not rocket science, but how they got to that result was completely bizarre and unprecedented. And that's what made it entertaining, especially when I'm like, hey, honey, look at this. Look what's happening here. And we see Bell take the shot down for Georgia and take the lead, and she just like falls off the couch. It was great. It was just tremendous fun. And I hope that we get some of that from Missouri and A&M. It's just going to be very different. It's just going to be 13 to 12. It'll be Georgia, Kentucky.
Disabuse you of that notion.
Right. It's not going to be offensive firepower, but I think it's fun that the winner of this game absolutely puts itself into playoff conversations. Absolutely. I think Texas A&M is not as good offensively and has a tougher schedule. But if Missouri goes down into College Station, a tough environment, and beats a very good defense with their own identity against Texas A&M's identity, which is strength on strength in this game, which is the Burden, Cook, Moore, Eli combination on offense with going against Elko's they got after Taylor Green last week against Arkansas, and we're starting to see, as we've said all along, this A&M defense is going to be salty all year, and it's going to get better and better and better and better. We'll get to the offense in a second. But I think Missouri comes out of this game with a win looking extremely positive for a playoff spot. And it doesn't mean that they're going to have enough spots for Missouri, but I think they're in the conversation at that point. And honestly, if A&M wins this game, I know it's a long shot, and I'm not suggesting it's going to happen. But if you win this game and Ole Miss is stumbling and Missouri's not as good, all of a sudden there might be some spots that a way to go 10-2 with a couple of marquee wins down the stretch. They're absolutely going to be in the conversation, but you got to win this one at home as a favorite first and foremost.
Yeah, I think it's a stretch to call this a playoff game. I am of the opinion that I don't know if A&M will be able to muster enough offense down the stretch with what they have. I think they have a great the defense is inarguable. I do think with something like an LSU coming up, that would probably knock them out eventually, because they're not going to beat Texas. As much as I know we hyped that game up. We were in preseason. I think as a work in progress, A&M is so far ahead of schedule, which is exactly what Mike Elko delivered at Duke. He's doing the exact same thing here. He's doing it in a very similar way. He muddied those games up for Duke. He took a roster that was offensive oriented. He's doing the same thing again at a much higher level of talent. It's amazing. However, I don't think they are going to. They might be in the playoff conversation in as much as 50 teams are, just because we're at a particular point in the calendar. Now, Missouri stands to make a lot of people mad this year. Okay, you had the lackluster win against Boston College, in as much at least insofar as not establishing the kind of dominance that you would want from someone who is in the playoff conversation race. Right? Then you have the ending against a Vanderbilt team that lost to Georgia State. Now that's, it's an eternity when teams are coming off of early buys. So we will see, but I like A&M a lot in this game. I like A&M to probably solve for some of the weaknesses that other teams that weren't as good, honestly, weren't able to capitalize. By the way, the other two wins that Missouri has, Buffalo and Murray State. Okay, we're not killers here. It's just that, like, if you're a pro SEC person or an SEC hater who's convinced of a conspiracy, you almost think that, like, Sankey and everyone, because this is a 1-year schedule, like the Missouri, Tennessee, Ole Miss happenstance of them not all none of those teams touch each other.
Kentucky helped us out with that, though.
Right, they did, but they're still, like, you're still talking about 3 teams above it and 2 more teams. You're talking about stuffing 5 into a 12-team playoff. Like, if Missouri does get out of this game, whether I like it or you like it, they would almost I don't know, have to lose to Oklahoma.
Yeah, it's a 3-game schedule. It's A&M, Alabama,
be knocked out. Like, yeah, here's what I think is going to happen. I think they're going to lose to A&M. I think this is the perfect team that falls into an A&M trap where we can get ready, we can get nasty. The fact that it's in College Station, I think, is a huge swing. I think A&M is starting to really feel momentum in a completely different way than they had absent those, like, if you look at it like on a line graph, those crazy spikes when, yes, Jimbo beat Nick. That's awesome. But you were never consistent. You were never consistent because that overlooks losing to App State. That overlooks programs like Ole Miss, who had a third of the NIL at the time, beating you every single year, or struggling against Mississippi State, or whatever. This is a consistent A&M. Yes, I really like the. It kind of sucks. This is an early kickoff, but I mean,
you know what it is. It's let's continue with the analogy here. It's a slow build, but you are starting at base camp at Everest, is what it is, because you got all the talent and you got the infrastructure and you got the money and you got all this other stuff. Like, you took the helicopter. Elko took the helicopter to base camp, and he's starting like 3,000 feet below the top of the mountain, and it's going to take a long time. You're going to have to walk slowly up those last 4,000 feet to get to the Hiller Step and then to the North Face. It's going to take a long, slow trudge, but you're starting pretty high up the mountain.
They won't feel a knockout punch either. If let's say it swings A&M's way. To your analogy of climbing a mountain, it's the summit is Texas, which is at the end of the season, because I'm telling you, I'm starting to believe in this schedule conspiracy, because it's like you get past this game as A&M. Maybe I'm talking myself into your theory here. It's like, at Mississippi State, LSU has to go to College Station. I will say this. There's one thing I would maybe backtrack and recant. South Carolina is a noisier out than I think anyone wants to give them.
Ole Miss better be real ready.
Well, the one thing,
those offensive linemen better.
If you want to transition, if you want to transition, talk about this. It is hilarious to me. Like, here's the whole game in a nutshell. By the way, if you didn't watch Kentucky Ole Miss, it's an Iowa football game. That's it. It is Mark Stoops' final evolution of Kentucky football. Is like, I'm going to change my OC every single year. It's not really going to matter, because we're going to drag you down into the pit, and you're either going to beat us 16-13 or we're going to upset you 17-16 or whatever. It's funny because, like, I can go both ways on this, Braden. The probability of the Kentucky win was single digits because it took a Hail Mary on a 4th and inside. They were 4th and something inside their own 20 to keep the drive going on the eventual touchdown. The prayer that they threw up was like a 63-yard pass, their longest offensive play of the season, an incredibly low probability completion, basically a sideline streak. And the kid came down with it. Now, what's funny about that is that the Texas A&M of this offseason was Ole Miss. We are going to spend our way out of our problems. And our problems as a development program are line play and a caliber of defense that would hold company with the teams that Braden and I have talked about today. So Georgia, Alabama, Texas, etc., right? Those two things have not happened because Kentucky was the first real opponent they faced. They had deceptive data. They really did. Like, I'm a Georgia Southern fan and I love them to death, but that's just not comparable in a 1-to-1 matchup. And honestly, the Wake Forest game is really deceptive because they just lost to a Sun Belt team last week. So they have one of the worst defenses in college football. So now, what did we see against Kentucky? We saw the money you spent fail to stop the big play, which has kind of always been Ole Miss's history of, like, we're gonna trip over ourselves in a key moment with a defensive blunder, right? Then you saw they got pushed, and they got pushed around, and Dart got flummoxed, It wasn't a lot of blitzing. There was some blitzing. There was a lot of 4 and 5 man pressure. Guess what South Carolina's really good at? Creating pressure with a front 4, maybe adding 5, and then still being able to play effective enough, drop zone, go into man, just
it's
do
a
something stinky and confusing.
Bad situation.
This is a referendum this weekend. Full stop on Ole Miss.
I 100% agree, because here's my theory on Ole Miss at the beginning, and I think I talked to you about this. I can't remember if we talked about it on this show or not, but I talked to some Ole Miss folks around the program like late in the summer, and I said, look, isn't this the like, if there's a program that could unravel, if there's a program that is volatile and fragile, isn't it Ole Miss? That if things start to go wrong, that it could go wrong quickly, because this isn't a program built. And I'm not trying to be old man here that says, well, you got to recruit and stay in the program and be loyal and blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that. But like, when you do have, like, Tennessee has nothing but like COVID seniors, super seniors, their middle linebacker has like about to have a kid and has been married. Like, Peely is like, they are loaded with a bunch of guys who are veterans, many of whom have been in the program with this coaching staff for years. That type of stability can overcome the volatility and the bizarre nature of college football. I don't know if Ole Miss has those pieces. I think Lane Kiffin can handle a dynamic locker room like he's got. I think he's uniquely qualified for that. But you all of a sudden are trailing in the fourth quarter to South Carolina and lost to Kentucky, 2 teams you were supposed to dominate. And all of a sudden, I just think that's a very tenuous situation for Ole Miss, more so than other places. So I agree with you. I think they need to make a statement if they want to get back on track. Otherwise, it could go south quickly.
Everything you just said applies to 2023 Texas A&M. So what's the through line here? Well, it's actually the one kid, Warren Nolan. Who's on both teams. Yeah. The Walter Nolan, sorry. The actual, what I'm getting at here is this. Everybody wants a referendum right away. That's the industry that we work in. We want to have context where there isn't. We want to immediately have a summary where we just haven't done the work. We're like 6 months away, I think, from having enough data on how to manage NIL in the portal at the highest level to create an effective roster. Okay. So here's what I'm getting at. When you go all in, so to speak, on a sort of 1 season free agency splurge to elevate your status, we have not seen that work yet. Now, when I said this on social, people are pointing out ascensions that haven't been stymied yet, like this year's Indiana team or something like that, right? Which is great, and that's true. And NIL was the reason that Kurt Signetti went to that program. And when it gets to be coaching time, you're going to ask me about jobs, and I'm going to tell you that now there is only one ruler above all else. It has nothing to do with facilities. This has nothing to do with alumni. It's now, what is the freaking payroll? Okay?
Yeah.
But don't fool yourself into thinking that what's going on in Indiana, while awesome and I think like pretty legit, is the same as what we're talking about. What we're talking about are programs trying to become national champions.
Yeah, going from 3 to 6 wins is easy. Going from even going from like 4 or 5,
Indiana might win 9 this year.
No, I agree, but going from 3 to 6 or going from 5 to 8, those are far easier than going from 9 to 11 or 12. It's just different.
Or 13.
It's totally different.
And so far we've seen some very moneyed. So Florida State is the complicating example here. Is you have A&M last year, you have Ole Miss this year. By the way, we're talking as if A&M has lost to South Carolina, but I'm going to be honest with you. It didn't look. I know it was one play that swung the game, but I'm much more interested in the fact that Ole Miss could not get into the rhythm, Braden, that's necessary. You want to go back to Tennessee for a second? Tennessee looked at the situation in Oklahoma and said, all right, stop, right? Downshift dramatically. We're going to let defense win this game. We're not going to try and press. We don't want our up-tempo offense and our young quarterback to walk straight into the one strong part of their entire team, which is the way that they ran their secondary. Like, honestly, the only touchdown pass in that game, I thought, or in the first half, was they basically just bit on the safety came down, bit in the wrong thing, left the post open. Okay. Tennessee is able to do that. They're able to say, you know what? Defense, take us home. Ole Miss cannot do that. They have spent the money. They have clearly not developed.
Well, and Missouri can't do that, I don't think, either.
No, but the problem is that no one's forced Missouri to do that.
No,
yet.
So I want to kind of go back to that for a second because I do want to ask you about, like, I thought I saw a little bit more of Colin Klein last week. I know we've kind of been dancing around Colin Klein, but I saw a little bit more. I saw like some RPOs and some quarterback draws and, some counter trays. Like, I saw some interesting stuff from the quarterback, Marcel Reed, maybe finding his rhythm. So that could also be a part of that Missouri A&M thing we're talking about, which is like maybe the offense it's even slower of a build, but like it's starting
See,
to.
I don't look as dumb for that Bowling Green thing. Everyone got on me and they're like, "Bowling, look, man, A&M sucks. Bowling Green." I'm like, "Hey, they use that as a chalkboard game."
Penn State, same. Bowling Green played well against Penn State, so
right.
There you go. All right, so ultimately, what I'm seeing a lot of this week in the SEC is that there are a lot of games that are far more interesting and important than I expected, even just a couple of weeks ago. I think Arkansas is a risky spot for Tennessee, but I don't like the matchup for Arkansas. I don't like the matchup because what we just saw is a defensive front in Texas A&M totally just maul an Arkansas team that wants to use its quarterback in really diverse ways and really interesting ways, and they just sort of mauled Taylor Green. They caused a couple fumbles, a few sacks, kept them behind the line, held the running game in check most of the game. Tennessee has the same skills as A&M does to do the same things. And I don't think Arkansas's got the defensive personnel to match up with Tennessee. But look, college football is crazy. It's a road game in a hostile environment. They're only like a 12, 13 points favorite. Tennessee should be better and should win the game, but that's interesting. Ole Miss, South Carolina was not on anyone's radar in the preseason as a circle game that says this could be the one that defines the season, but it could. Florida at home as an underdog against Central Florida. This is not a season-defining moment here, but this is a huge. I mean, like, I don't know what Florida's waiting for. If they win a few of these games, maybe something different happens. But I don't know. But that game's more interesting than I expected. So
yeah, UCF's very interesting just because if you only watch SEC football, one, branch out and get some variety in your life. But two, this is a very
SEC quarterback. So.
Well, this is a very SEC setup at UCF is what I was going to get at. The problem is they don't have an SEC offensive line, and they're running vintage Gus with KJ, who is a vintage 2014-15 Gus quarterback. They just don't necessarily have the line play to open up the run the way that they should. They've been really shaky at times and kind of just fell ass backwards into an upset of TCU. So
Colorado smoked them last week.
Well, yeah, because they're not good.
But that's not. You should not get smoked at home by Colorado.
Colorado is. I will say this: Colorado is getting actually better. They're not getting good. I think they're just getting better.
Yep.
They're getting more consistent, and usually, if you get more consistent in any aspect, you're going to get a little bit better. And in that league, there's so much variance in the top end.
All right, back to Florida. What
UCF matches well against Florida?
But what's Florida doing though? Why? What's happening?
Shit, I don't know. If you answer that question, you'd probably be the athletic director there.
All right, my next question is going to be, what is Auburn doing? But I want to ask you first. I'm the one who, and all the times I'm going to brag about being right, I'm going to put my hand up and be accountable. That's the whole point of this. I thought it was premature to give up on Jackson Arnold as quickly as they did. Okay. I might have been wrong about that.
Right.
Michael Hawkins, very beginning of the game, huge run. Clearly huge, big, explosive pass plays in the second half. Yes, Auburn did the most Auburn thing of all time, which is the pick six to lose the game. They missed a field. Like, there's all kinds of Auburn stuff happening in that game.
Yep.
Here's what's fascinating to me. I think Oklahoma is what it is. It is a new offense with a new offensive line, injured receivers, a new quarterback now, a second new quarterback with a new coordinator and a great defense, and they're playing like it. I actually think Oklahoma kind of is what they are, and that could be a pretty good team by the end of the year. I find Auburn to be utterly fascinating. They average 7.1 yards per play in a loss to Arkansas, 431 yards of offense. They average 6.4 yards per play and 482 yards. Those are very good numbers against an Oklahoma defense. Almost 500 yards of offense and almost 7 yards of play. They had 913 yards of offense and almost 7 yards of play in their last two losses. They have 20 plays of 30 yards or more, second in the SEC. They have 12 plays of 40 yards or more, number one in the conference. And yet the defense and the play calling for Oklahoma was take as many shots as you want. And I don't
know. It was we can be disrespectful in how we set up that turnover. That was a created turnover in that game. It was how disrespectful we could be to Peyton Thorne. And it worked.
What are they doing? What are they doing? Like, what is
They're
happening?
Not good. They have bad,
how can you
bad coaching? This is not rocket science.
But they're putting up, like, the numbers are there, the efficiency metrics are there, like it's missing field goals and interceptions.
This is the
like,
stats.
what are they doing?
This is the stats nerds thing. This is honestly, this is the argument that a pretty significant core of the coaching community will still make against just living and dying on advanced metrics. They can move the ball. They are moving the ball. That's what we're saying here. Oklahoma, I think, look, we know what they are at this point, okay? Auburn played a pretty decent game. I thought they played well at certain points in that game against Oklahoma, but the bottom line is
they were up 21-10 with 11 minutes to go in the fourth quarter inside the Oklahoma 40-yard line.
If you want, like, I get it. There's a lot of people in this industry on our side, the media side, that just want to embrace analytics as God. And what they want to say is, well, what the stats tell us.
That's not what I'm doing.
I know you're not. But what I'm saying, I've heard this argument about Auburn like pop up for the last like 2 or 3 weeks. Well, they, technically they're doing, or well, statistically. And I'm like, hey, that's fine and good. You can't argue, like, it's not circumstance when it's down a stretch. So let me lead you to this. Do you think for a second a Georgia team that is probably, well, not worse, but does not have particular standout talent at certain positions, do you honestly think that, like, given the Auburn-Georgia result last year and Georgia not being as maybe like, until the third quarter against Bama, lightning effective on offense, do you think that history's going to, you've seen Auburn play this year, do you think history's going to repeat itself and Auburn's going to be able to drag Georgia down to its level? Do you?
No, but also, would I be surprised? Like,
isn't that a sign of opposite? That you're not progressing?
I hear you. And one of the most bizarre plays in all of college football last year was Peyton Thorne running for like an 80-yard play against Georgia, like on an option off the right side.
Outlier.
He hadn't done that at all. But that's my point. Like, they are. If you told me that they hit a couple of big plays and all of a sudden are doing, like, one of those talented receivers makes a couple of bizarre plays and all of a sudden they've done something crazy and it's like a 20-13 Georgia lead late in the game, I wouldn't be that surprised. There's also old school rivalry here, caveat, I guess. I don't know if that applies. I'm just saying, if they can move the football and they can hit big plays, which the numbers are clearly telling us they can do, and I'm out and my eyeballs, who's to say that they can't find themselves in a fight in the third quarter with Georgia? Auburn doesn't make sense. They don't make sense.
Auburn needed Georgia to win last week for anything to happen.
I agree.
Like, they're going home to Athens.
For a school that its DNA is filled with chaos, and what Auburn is, like, this is even more of what Auburn is. And I asked that question not to be like, oh, the metrics are the end all be all. I asked that to be like, how is it possible that they are this? And the answer might just be Auburn.
No, I don't know. It's bad. That is bad coaching. It's bad culture. It's bad atmosphere. That is a team that fundamentally does not believe when faced with adversity, it can overcome.
I thought you were going to say does not believe a word its head coach says, which also would be true.
That's kind of what I just said. I just said it with different words.
Look, Baby Billy's always preaching, man. I just don't know I believe anything he's saying. So, old Baby Billy.
It's gonna have to be an implosion. Everyone asks me all the time, what's it gonna take this year? It would take a lot this year. Like, lot.
They're not gonna.
I don't know. Honestly, to get rid of him. Yeah, the funny thing that's saving Hugh right now is that Auburn is having to live with its magic beans that it bought. And, like, you can't go back to market. The problem is that who are you going to get if you go back to market after an abrupt 2-year kill, and then before that you paid out a then record buyout to Gus, who took you to a national title game, and then you cut his knees out. Like, they're getting to become like buyer beware.
Look, I am not shocked that we're here. I'm shocked that it's happening this fast. I'm also fascinated by how it's happening, which is big explosive plays, efficient offense, and mystifying defeats. Like, it's just, he's just like redefining Auburn, which is hilarious to me. Not that I'm picking on Auburn. I love the city of Auburn, by the way. It's a great city.
What could happen here that would probably honestly save his season. And I think give them some momentum or some sort of like cohesion, or at least justify what you're talking about statistically, is that they get into a similar game with Missouri, which is not next week. It's the next game on the schedule, but they have a bye after that. So that's the one where I like Auburn. But then the rest of the stretch is like, you don't like them in the situation against Kentucky, and they still have A&M and Alabama. So are they gonna bowl? They'll push a bowl out. They still have some crappy game. They have
I think they can give it them.
ULM and Vandy. Well, there you go. I'm not gonna say that on the air. Diego, get him twice. What if Diego gets him twice?
We've talked about that on the show. It would be wonderful. Is Diego going to get? Is Diego going to have any opportunity to run this weekend?
Is Diego going to die this weekend
against Bama? I really wanted to take Bama minus the 23, but there's got to be a little bit of an exhale from Alabama this week.
Why?
I don't know. It's Vanderbilt. These are human beings, Godfrey. These are human beings who look at. They're probably out partying at MO Rose, by the way. Also, so let's point that out. All the players are probably out partying.
There you go. There you
go. But no, I don't know how you don't. First of all, human nature is to exhale against Vanderbilt, and human nature is to exhale after a game like that. What made Nick Saban brilliant was eliminating human nature from the entire process of the game of football. And when they're 18-22, human nature is stronger and more emotional. So I don't know. I'm not sure I would touch that game if I was gambling. I don't think Alabama's going to struggle, but I would touch the game.
I think I know what you're trying to do here, and I recognize that I don't know if I want to endorse it, but
what am I trying to do?
Alabama leaves with a win. They're the number one team in the country, but then they're set up to do the one thing that Nick always prevented against. Nick was close to undefeated after a loss.
Probably. I'm not worried about the loss. Like if this was Florida,
but again, go back to last week. They lost that second half, and a miracle pulled their asses out of the fire. That's like a
17-year-old. 17-year-old did.
Yes, kill everybody. But
I can't believe that Fowler didn't say anything about that. They left it on the screen for like 5 minutes.
I had it on mute, so I didn't know. It was all over social, obviously.
I mean, sure.
What if he delivers? Like, what if they only win by 10? Are Bama fans freaking out?
Probably.
A week out. Yeah.
But that's those folks are in a group,
Yeah, well, they're in a group.
That's like the same. That's like the same group. There's a group of Tennessee fans right now that is more worried about Florida coming to Neyland without Billy Napier than with him, because that's how fans work in their mind.
That's different because Tennessee still doesn't believe they deserve nice things because it's been so long.
I'm just saying that is the psyche. We contain multitudes, Godfrey. We are.
One should be able to coach Florida to a win over this Tennessee team.
Fans are strange. Human beings are strange, bizarro, complex.
It's just because Bob Shoop called the wrong defense when Butch was there, and they gave that thing up over the. Y'all, like
Bob Shoop taking strays 10 years later.
He did it. Vol fans, y'all gotta. I wonder at what point in that schedule they like, and this you're qualified to answer this. At what point is Tennessee going to wake up and say, "Yeah, I'm talking about as a fan base in the zeitgeist, like we are this good"?
So here's what's funny. I think they started the year that way. This is a good question. I think they started and I've asked some people about this recently, and I'm getting very strangely mature answers, which is ironic, honestly.
Scary for that group.
No, I know. And I think that they were actually more hyped about the team before the season. And I think what's happened is now they have learned. Right. Now they've gotten through a couple of the hurdles, and they know that it's a 2-game season. And even if they lose both of them, they still could get into the playoff. And I think the 12-team playoff has changed their brains in Knoxville to some degree, because they know they're that good, but they're not as worried about the thing happening to them, because they don't think it's going to happen against Arkansas or Florida or Kentucky or Mississippi State. And it probably won't, because if the thing does happen against them, against Alabama and Georgia, finishing as a 6 or 7 or 8 seed is what they want. They want a home game at Neyland, and they're fine not playing in the SEC championship game, I think. And that's a crazy place for Tennessee fans to be mentally.
When are they going to own up to that quality, though? I feel like they're constantly walking around like a secret society being like, I think it feels like 98, but I don't want to say it too loud.
Well, if they lose to Florida, it'll feel like 09, and that's a different feeling
No,
altogether.
it'll feel like the last 25 years.
Right. And the night they drove Old Kiffy down is when it started, 09. But I think what's interesting is that if this was a 4-team playoff, I think they would be feeling that way, that they'd be walking around, we're so great, because we need to prove that we belong in. And they'd be more panicked at home in a moment of
now I think you're giving them more credit than they deserve for maturity. I don't think they have that kind of long view.
I normally I'd agree with you. But I think that they are like, yeah, we're really effing good. But if we lose a game,
don't want to tell anybody.
No, but if we lose a game, it doesn't matter. We're still good enough to play in the playoff. I think that's what it is. It's a quiet confidence in the fact that they don't think they're going to lose any other time.
Chat woke up.
That's all I'm saying.
As soon as you started talking about, the emotional, the emotional metrics of the Tennessee fan base, chat wakes up. We're here to ruin your team's season. Whose season are you ruining? That's my point.
Grayson McCall,
Arnold. A&M is here to ruin someone's season. South Carolina is here to ruin someone's season.
South Carolina, and that is ultimately the game that Tennessee fans are ultimately most scared of, which is a thing like South Carolina happening, right? Where Spencer, no, it's the game that happened with Hendon Hooker. It's
right.
Quarterback
tears. They're not on the schedule. Yeah.
No, they're not. But quarterback tears ACL, gives up 60 points, loses game unexpectedly. That is the thing that they will not admit they're scared of. But that can only happen against like Kentucky this year. I think Kentucky's the only one that could do it.
You know what's insane about this new dynamic in the non-division world of the SEC is like, I don't think you're going to disagree that like no one's predicting long-term success for Shane Beamer and no one's predicting Shane Beamer in South Carolina, like, going to contend for the title of the conference title, right?
In the future, probably not. No.
Right. But at the same time, like there is something to be said, and I don't know if this will pacify like South Carolina boosters because I know Shane can be a lot, but like you're 3-1, you came close to getting that scalp with LSU. You got a really good chance this weekend against Ole Miss. Like, I wonder how long Shane can sell. Just like we're going to kamikaze really good team season, but it's going to cost us like 2 brain fart losses. That's kind of the space they've lived in, I guess it depends on how often they beat Clemson, to be totally honest with you.
fair enough. Andrew,
I mean, like, what do you want at South Carolina?
No, I agree.
I agree. Yeah. What do you want, guys?
Again, I think it goes to our very first question about setting expectations. If I'm South Carolina, I want to be able to get to the playoff once every decade. And do they have more natural inherent advantages than a team that only gets to the playoff once every 10 years? Maybe they do. But there's been no proof of concept at any point during the 85, 100-year history of the program. Now, what I find interesting, you said Texas A&M. Texas A&M could ruin enough seasons that all of a sudden they're having one of those seasons, is what I'm saying. They could beat LSU. They could beat Texas at home. They could do real damage and all of a sudden wake up and be a 10-2 team. It's not crazy. As
much as we both like Klein, I also think they're behind schedule enough to where in the offensive development with Reed, where they could also, like, you just got done talking about Auburn, like they got to go to Auburn. They're not. I don't think they're cohesive enough yet where they don't trip once.
Okay,
and that trip would take them out of the kind of conversation that you're.
I completely agree. I'm not predicting it. I'm just saying it's not. Right. Just watch them slowly continue to grow. We both believe in Elko. We both believe in the defense, and that shit travels to every game. So no question about that. Quickly, SEC Big Ten scheduling combination. Are we just one step closer to? I've always believed the SEC should have 9 conference games. I just think that's the way to do it. I think it's better for everybody involved: fans, coaches, teams, playoff resumes, TV partners, etc. But if they both have the 9 conference games, then they can kind of have the scheduling thing. I don't love the idea, but I do think more balanced scheduling leads to cleaner playoff brackets ultimately.
Yes.
So I think that part of this could be good. But 8 automatic bids for the Big Ten and the SEC, I'm not down with that.
Okay, so we're talking about a lot here, but so basically next week the SEC and the Big Ten conference offices of the 2 leagues.
It's not this week.
ADs. I
thought it was this week.
I think it's next week in here in Nashville at an undisclosed location that Braden and I were talking about off air.
I'll be bouncing around hotel lobbies all week.
Be lobby snooping. one of the big discussions, if the Big Ten and the SEC are just going to kind of solidify this like shared dominance over the sport and the decision-making matrix. And there's a lot of stuff to unpack with that. But for terms of this immediate 3-minute conversation,
it's closing.
The Big Ten really,
control.
really wants them to go to 9 games for comparative, just sort of a parity. And I do agree with the Big Ten. I think it's stupid.
Yep.
I think there are so many teams. Look, bottom line is you're going to get more quality football. I don't know what it's going to do downstream with the Group of 5 and FCS. Like, just by saying that, by the way, saying, hey, you should go from 8 to 9 in the SEC, you just killed 15 or 20 schools' budgets. You killed it. Because taking that extra check that Auburn or Florida or whoever's going to write to kick the crap out of some Kent State shaped team, that's their that makes their athletic budget whole budget.
Then why don't we take the extra $1 billion TV's going to give for the extra 2 games of the playoff and earmark like 0.1% for the Sun Belt Conference?
They'll never do that.
Why can't we do that?
They'll never do that. Sun Belt's actually getting more self-sufficient. It's like Conference USA and MAC. I'm a little bit more worried about. You've seen a lot of MAC teams coming to play the SEC. The Sun Belt is trying to wean itself off of the paychecks in advance of that happening. And also the Sun Belt is trying to position itself opposite the American as that contender for the G5, that 12 seed. There are some poor schools where, what I just said, it's,
it's
Missouri.
Poe. Isn't it Poe? I think it's Poe.
Yeah. Well, okay, so West, if you had a situation where Missouri, instead of playing like a Western Kentucky, now has an extra game and they play an Ole Miss, well, that's good because we're going to learn about Missouri and Ole Miss in September like we did. That's great, right? But that's budget, man. That's there's a serious impact to that. However, as the G5 stand, I'm saying I don't even care. I think we just need to fix the economics because it is getting stupid that you still have teams walking through 5 and 6 weeks of football without having a good data point. And it's very dude, Ole Miss was that team going into last week.
Agree. No, I don't look. The paycheck games are important for one. It is one of the weirdest parts of the game where, like, if you care about football, then you want the paycheck game. But if you care about football, you don't want the paycheck game also, as a fan of the big stuff. And so that's why this is why we're headed towards governing body with a breakaway. It's going to be an NCAA subdivision, and we're going to have a commissioner, and it's going to be oversight and rules and management and scheduling, and everything's going to be exactly the same for like the top 45 or 50 teams. And then they'll have their own paycheck. And that's okay too, to have them play in a different sport because they already play a different sport than the smaller schools in the South or around the country. So
you mean ULM and Alabama aren't the same?
I don't believe so. I mean, they still like the same food, listen to the same music, go to the same parties, drink the same whiskey, but otherwise I don't think the budgets are the same.
Just a bit off.
All right. SplitZoneDuo.com. What else you got for the good folks that you would like to tell everybody about?
WKCFB.com. That's Who Killed College Football. That is a scripted miniseries. It is a narrative anthology with myself and Ryan Naney. You know him as Celebrity Hot Tub on various social media platforms. It is a large-scale look at everything that's gone on, everything that is going on. We're actually having to change our scripts because of things that are happening in the news. Who Killed College Football? I know what you're saying. College football is alive. We just talked about it. Yes, but it is very different, and a lot of people are feeling a particular kind of way about it. WKCFB.com. You can support us on Substack. Washington Post wrote about Alabama-Georgia. SCD. I don't know. I got jobs, man. That's enough, honestly. At 38 Godfrey on social media.
ML Rose, if you're in Nashville. If you're already here, go to one of their 6 locations. Fantastic beer, great happy hours during pregame and the opening kickoff weekend. So this weekend, Missouri and Texas A&M. If you're a Bama fan, if you're in town this weekend to play Vanderbilt, go check out ML Rose. Great burgers, great craft beer, a lot of it local, so you get a great flavor of Nashville. They got 6 locations all across the Middle Tennessee area, and great happy hours. 2-for-1s on Saturdays and Sundays while you're watching football. I don't know what else you need. Great brunch menu. You got biscuits and sausage, egg, and cheese. You got all kinds of great stuff on there. So go check out the great and wonderful and amazing folks over at ML Rose. You can get to me at Braden Gall on the Twitter machine. I am going down with the ship, of course. Otherwise, for Steven, thank you for listening. I'm Braden. You guys have a great weekend, everybody.